This video is brought to you by Slate Black Industries. For grips and accessories, visit slateblackindustries.com. Welcome to 9-Hole Reviews. While war never changes, technology certainly does. And when the US sits across the other side of the chessboard, it would behoove one to match up with technology. Today we journey down the AK74 modernization process and its three main phases of development. First, the development of optics that attach without modifications to the rifle. Then, minor parts development and material improvements to interface modern accessories. And finally, the complete overhaul of an interface rail system. Now if you're thinking, that's exactly what happened to the M4 and M16 series. Well, that's because it did. Modernization is a natural progression of a successful Cold War small arms design. After all, a successful, reliable, and accurate enough base rifle should not go to waste just because the battlefield requires innovation on peripheral technologies. As we've examined in the part 1 of the AK74 video, the basic AK74 and subsequently the AK74M has certainly enjoyed a long period of service under the former Soviet Union states, and this system endured through various phases of modernization. But modernization doesn't happen overnight, nor is it a single project. Through the Kalashnikov modernization process, we see Russian entities observing Western R&D initially for emulation, but ultimately for adaptation as needed. This is smart and cuts down on development costs. So unlike its Western counterparts, the AK74 has a unique dichotomy and a blend of Eastern versus Western modernization mentalities. But let's get on with it. Phase 1 is to integrate optics to the weapon system directly, with no modifications to the weapon itself. Much like the M16, the rifles were initially intended to be used with no optics. Unlike the M16, however, the original AK74 lacked the provisions to directly mount any regular optics to it. It was a race for nighttime dominance that spurred the concurrent development of the AK74N or 6P20N with the night vision accessory rail. Now we must note that the initial design of the side rail actually came from the AKML and the AKMN as a night vision model AKM in 7.62x39. These side rails were subsequently redesigned onto the AK74N to accept the PSO series Dragunov scopes. But these scopes were actually never issued with the AK74N. And it was a field soldier in Afghanistan who quickly realized that the RPG's PGO-7 actually fit on the same accessory rail. Now with this discovery, some Soviet troops were quick to outfit their AK74M rifles with a slight 2.8 magnification RPG optic to aid the extended ranges engagements in the Afghan mountains. This was mainly to spot an impact effect and to use the rocket grid reticle to correct for fires. We actually tested this exact combination on a practical accuracy test, and despite an extremely awkward shooting position, if pressed, the combination actually yielded decent results in striking extended combat distance targets. So the race was on. The AK74M rail became the basis for a slew of Phase 1 modernization optics to be generated. The Russian 1P29 Universal Small Arm Sight is perhaps one of the most striking appearances of earlier daytime optical adaptations as an infantry scope. It is clear that this is a straight copy of the British Trilux Suit combat scope, widely used on the L1A1 SLR rifle. The reticle of the 1P29 is also a direct copy of the British Suit scope, but the 1P29 has a side rangefinder. This offset prism was actually designed to specifically cut down on the length. Take note that zeroing and shooting the optic requires the user to account for the offset objective lenses. Another note on the 1P29 is that the Russians actually issued these with different elevation wheels for the PKM and RPK as well, all with a 400 meter zero, and the optic can actually be fitted onto most infantry weapons available, including the Dragunov sniper rifle. So what about close-up engagements? The 1P63 Obzor Kilometer Scope is a day and nighttime CQB solution for the Soviet forces. Before Trijicon came out with their dual-source illumination for the ACOG, the Soviets had been running this tritium-lit and daylight fiber optic kilometer scope as a reflex sight solution. You could see here that with the lights on, the scope gathers ambient light and projects it onto a screen. But under low light, the tritium actually lights up the T reticle for nighttime use. One of the problems with daylight gathering optics is with drastic differences in lighting conditions in your environment. The Soviet solution to this is to have an internal lens filter, like an internal tint, so that you could see the lit reticle easier and shoot with both eyes open, much like the South African Armson OEGs.
Let's go check this one. On this type of shooting where I'm kind of just ripping as fast as I can go, I don't see there being a major disadvantage to using an optic like this over, say, a crisper, clearer aim point or EOTech style, Western reticle, if you will. This seems perfectly fine. It's a little bit faint, but when you flip it over and close up the aperture, you get a much crisper looking reticle. In order to effectively utilize this style optic, where it feels like things are pretty tight when you're looking down them, and you may need to close the aperture to get better contrast with the reticle, you really have to be utilizing a two eyes open or both eyes open strategy of aiming.
The last iteration of the drop-in N-rail compatible infantry sight is still in Russian military circulation. Seen in these images in 2014, this would be a 1P78 Kashtan, or a 2.8x optic with a tritium-lit day and night reticle, while the 1P78 is most often compared as a rival to the American ACOG. The optical quality is most certainly lacking. So the early phases of modernization was to make the best use of a night vision accessory rail on N-model Kalashnikovs. The general integration of the side rail into the later AK74Ms and AK100 series rifles is an indication on how important these optics were to the Russian military to increase the shooter's day and nighttime effectiveness. So, now what? Phase 2. Minor mounting solutions and the improvement of modern materials. It was the 80s going on to the 90s, and the Soviet states were switching their wood furniture production to polymer. No longer was polymer fragile like it was in the 50s. The shock and temperature-resistant polymers gave the AK74M and the AK100 series rifles a modern look. Now, it should be noted that the AK74 also had a few minor upgrades to the AK74M, such as the new bump rivet, the 5.5mm folding trunnion, and other minor upgrades, but most notably, the universal optic mounting side rail. We've covered a significant amount of the AK100 series upgrades in our AK103 video. Russia was under turmoil in the 90s and the USSR fell apart. Russian R&D most certainly took a back seat, and the internal struggles with the Russian economy pushed the nation to commercialize the export of the Kalashnikov. Some furniture was even made to adapt to a wider market for a greater distribution around the world. The increased influx of the exportation of the AK-type rifles spurred a flurry of furniture-based modernization kits from the US all the way to Israel. While they worked as a 1913 base for lights and accessories to be crudely clamped onto, despite decent materials used, the most notable sentiment from this era was to reject these early tactical furniture kits due to how clunky and restricting they could be. The proliferation of body armor also pushed the market in an unlikely direction of combining the M4 stock onto the Kalashnikov. From the late 2000s to 2015 timeframes, the Ultimak gas tube was a solid base to tie in microdots with lights and limited peripheral accessories. But the gas tube itself gets hot, and the AK system already runs much hotter than other rifles.
I was smart enough to remember my glove today, as I knew we were shooting the AK.
We should especially note that RS Regulate from the US also made a wildly popular series of optical mounts that work similar to Russian Phase 1 upgrades. However, unlike Russian optics, RS Regulate side rails interfaces with Western type optics. The folding stock is then unable to lock, just like other Phase 1 Russian upgrades. One of the major breakthroughs in the M16 and M4's modernization process was the M4 SOP mod package. This solid lockup rail up front was actually able to tie together the laser designator, lights, and the flat top enabled the universal use of any optical device out there, truly progressing the US service weapons to the next generation. Now, it was the Kalashnikov's turn to play catch up, but catch up it did indeed. Phase 3, the railed interface systems. And so finally, we have arrived. The multinational plethora of AK rifles from different eras of production in the different source nations presented manufacturers with another problem. How was a manufacturer supposed to produce rails that would fit a wide variety of specifications? Then the use of night vision introduced laser designators that required an interface with zero shift, and the solution depends on whether you're from the east or the west. while US and Western commercial entities figured out the different specs required from different eras in different countries, and they precision machined adjustable rails to precisely fit whatever pattern there was out there. On the opposite end of the spectrum, the Russians, namely the Zenitco kits, require pressure fitting, meaning that the rails are oversized and they are designed to squeeze extremely tight into the smaller stamped receiver to achieve an incredibly solid mounting surface. Even with detachable Picatinny sections, these rails are heavy. And in the last 10 years of conflict, Zenitco-clad desert-painted AK74Ms and AK105s have most certainly been more and more prevalent in the hands of Spetsnaz operators. The friction fit in the front end is one of the most solid rail solutions that brings the AK74 AK100 series to the modern era. So on the other side of the Pacific, the US market came out with another breakthrough: M-LOK.
As we see the development of modern rail systems going away from the full cheese grater quad rails and into more modular rail systems which are lighter and allow the user to sort of self-configure exactly as they want, well, we've seen certain companies bring that to the Kalashnikov platform. I recall Troy being one of the first to have sort of a more modular rail system, very similar to their Troy Alpha rail that was developed for the AK. And in current times, Henry and I have fallen to two primary rail systems that we both really like. The first is what you're looking at right here. This is the SLR rail system. It comes in various lengths and shapes. Some are completely slick along the side, while others have 1913 attachments in some key specific areas. And the SLR rails also have a specific gas tube top rail that can or cannot be used at the user's discretion. One of my favorite parts about the SLR rails is how easy they are to install, which is going to be a theme with some of the US-based accessories when we contrast it against, say, the Russian Zenit kit. The SLR rails simply slide in and have two screws that lock them onto the barrel in place. It is a very, very easy installation process.
Come on, almost there.
The other main rails that Henry and I are liking nowadays is the RS Regulate rail. This one takes a bit more patience in terms of fitting and filing it in order to get it fit onto the gun, but it is exceptionally lightweight and has a really unique, cool look to it. One of the distinctions between why I tend to gravitate towards the SLR rails and Henry tends to gravitate towards the RS rails comes down to our use philosophy and what we're likely trying to do with these particular firearms. Because I've recently been focusing on more night vision related shooting, the ability for me to mount IR devices to my rail system is of critical importance. While the RS rail system is exceptionally lightweight, it does also have a bit more flex than I would like in it for mounting of IR devices. The SLR rail is a bit more sturdy, but it does have quite a bit more weight behind it. So as you can see here, I actually have a D-ball eye squared mounted up on those 1913 sections of this particular SLR rail on the AK Alpha Trainer build here. And so the top cover mounting solution. This one is from Texas Weapon Systems, their dogleg mount. Over the years, these mounts have had a stigma of being not the greatest in terms of their ability to hold zero, and that's based on how they utilize the rear trunnion and the recoil spring guide to basically lock into place. Now, I want to be fair. We have not actually seen any of the zero shift issues that have been discussed for these top rail style mounts. With that said, though, these are 2.5 to 4 inch guns, so the amount of deviation that you may or may not be getting could be sort of being lost in the wash in terms of the cone of fire, cone of deviation. And the last piece of modernization kit I want to talk about is the full chassis. Again, for those of you who aren't aware, the chassis system is basically the lower handguard and gas tube are connected or screwed together and connect. And then they also have an element which flashes up over the top of the receiver that is connected to the entire handguard and gas tube system. So the Sure Shot option is one of the main ones that is available nowadays. They are extremely expensive. And then the other option that we have is the TDI X47 system, although that nowadays is no longer available here, at least not readily at the time of making this particular video, although we have seen some communication from TDI that they may be offering it again in the US market. Henry, back to you.
So here we are, nearly 50 years from 1974, when the AK74 proved itself to be a formidable fighting rifle. And we're still able to adapt it further for modern day use. Unlike the M16, the AK74 draws development from both the US and Russia, with different mentalities to optimizing the brutally effective rifle. For the large part, the Russian military still favors its heavy mechanized infantry doctrine, where the armor does the fighting and the infantry protects the armor. You likely won't see regulars using the latest modernized AK-12. But they still may be rolling with a T-90 main battle tank. Modernization of the system does not give the AK-74 better accuracy, but for special operations or a Spetsnaz operator, that optic that helps you aim faster, or that Perst 4 IR laser that helps you aim at night, may be the key to mission success. At the end, not all weapons can be effectively modernized, but the AK-74 series rifles certainly puts up a stiff opposition to the M4. And we certainly don't expect this to be the last chapter. We've made some pretty sweet merch. You'll see under slatesblackindustries.com that we have some pretty cool patches for sale. Currently, we've just released the Black Hawk Down Goodies vs Baddies with a Gordon Carbine and the Sushka, or AKSU patches for sale. These are limited stock on hand, so get them while they're available.
Право. Есть загорание двух крайних диодов центральных мест. Нейтраль погасли. Рут влево. Есть загорание двух крайних диодов. В центре не горят. Нейтраль погасла.
I think 15 like 2, 1 big door, 2 packs, break on 1, over.